Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. In this recording, I'm sharing the highlights of 2024 as this year comes to an end. I hope you enjoy it. Just some of the interviews I recommend highly you watch if you missed those this year. And I'll be back next year. So see you then. Today is the last day of 2024, and I'm sharing with you the highlights of this past year. I picked out some of the interviews that were my very favorites from this year, which is really one of the hardest tasks I have because I honestly love every interview. I really enjoy talking with all of my guests. So, paring the number down to just 12 conversations that I enjoyed the most was very challenging. So I encourage you to go back and listen to everything from the past year, but here are some of my favorites and some of the highlights of the year. And if you missed any of them, I hope you'll take a chance to tune in to some of these that you might enjoy. So let's get into it. Share my screen here. 2024 highlights, the best of the best. First, I wanted to share with you a conversation I had with Johanna Lunn about the When You Die project and her three films, raising death awareness. And they're just excellent films. I really enjoyed my conversation with Johanna. I loved watching the three films. And so I want you to know about this so that you can, excuse me, you can access these films if you need content for a workshop or a class or teaching, or if you wanted to do a film night and discussion group. Um, the When You Die Projects films would be an excellent choice to show. And so Johanna and I talked about why we need to look ahead to create something new rather than relying on what has worked in the past when we're trying to improve end of life care. And I think that's a great message as we move into a new year. Look ahead, don't keep looking back and trying the same old things. Let's use our creativity and try something new. And Johanna talked about the need for both a curing team and a healing team when we're dealing with serious illness at the end of life. Um, and I love this idea. And that's something to remember as we're working with patients in palliative care in particular. People need to retain their curing team sometimes before they're ready to switch to what they might consider a healing team. And we need to help them make those transitions. Then Johanna talked about what she's learned about death, dying, in the afterlife from creating this project and who can benefit from the films and her long-term goals for them. So take a listen, as I said, to learn about these films, which might be useful to you. You can get access to them. You have to pay, but you can get access for a movie night in your community if you'd like to do some education using films. Another film that I'm very interested in sharing with you is the film The Last Ecstatic Days, which I discussed with Dr. Aditi Sethi-Brown, who is one of the featured providers in the film, caring for her patient, Ethan Sisser, in the very last days of his life. It's such a beautiful, powerful movie. I hosted a showing of that film this year and had two showings because so many people signed up. We couldn't fit them all into the first one. So we hosted a second one so that more people could sign up and see it. It is powerful. It is thought provoking. It can be disturbing to some people to watch this film, but there's information in this conversation about how you might host a showing and have a discussion afterwards. It's very moving, and I encourage you to take a look at the film, listen to my conversation with Aditi first, and that may help you decide if it's right for you. She tells us about Ethan Sisser's journey and how she came to work with him, what inspired the making of the film The Last Ecstatic Days, which is literally authentically films the last days of Ethan's life and includes his death and his funeral and burial afterwards. We talk about how Ethan served as a teacher for others during his life and in his dying process. He devoted himself to being a teacher of consciousness and spirituality, and which he continued up until his very last breath, or even now, still teaching others about life and death. How Ethan called together a community of people willing to help care for him as he was dying. And so, really, the genesis of this film and the fact that he was able to have care providers who would care for him. It was because he kind of willed it into existence. He asked that this happen for him, and indeed it did. And then we learn about the power of social media that Ethan had been able to harness throughout his journey after his diagnosis, and what a powerful medium it is for teaching people and making a difference. Next, I love this episode with Dr. Kaishana Gidry. I got to meet Kaishana at Endwell in 2023, and we really hit it off and decided we just have to have a conversation together. So, Dr. G joined me for this conversation on filling the gaps in end of life care, where she talked all about her mobile medical practice and how she helps provide continuity of care for people who no longer qualify for hospice care. She is a hospice doctor, but her mobile medical practice helps take care of those people who get discharged from hospice or who aren't eligible for one reason or another yet to be on hospice. So she fills in the gap. She makes sure that these patients have continuous care while they are waiting to be eligible again for hospice or waiting to sign up for hospice for the first time. And she talks about, first of all, why some patients get discharged from hospice, which is something that perhaps not everyone knows about, that this happens and that there is a group of people who needs this kind of stopgap care if they do get discharged. She talks about how she guides people who are pre-hospice, not quite ready yet to sign up for hospice, how she helps them do advanced care planning and be prepared for hospice when the timing is right. And she also educates physicians about working with hospice and palliative care. And she's written a book for physicians. And so important. And I love this mentality. In a compassionate community, our focus has to be on seeing the gaps in care wherever they exist. They might be different in every community, but you need to have the ability to survey your own community and figure out what is missing here, what what needs to be here that is not here right now, and how can I help provide that in order to improve end of life care in my community. And Dr. Kaishana Gidry has done exactly that in her community in San Diego. And I love her dearly, and she's so much fun, so wonderful and warm to talk to. And so I'm really excited to share this again and make sure everyone listens in case you missed it the first time around. Next, this interview was something I had been looking forward to for months. I'd been following Rosie Grant on and her account Ghostly Archive on Instagram for months. Her showing recipes from gravestones that she collected. She traveled all around gathering recipes and then making the dishes, the food in the recipes, and bringing that food to the gravesite. And so I love this cooking to honor the dead. And we had such a fun and interesting conversation. And I'm absolutely intrigued and even obsessed with this idea of gathering recipes from gravestones in cemeteries. I love visiting cemeteries, but it never occurred to me to look specifically for gravestones that might have a recipe carved on them, because there are more than I would have thought. And so Rosie and I talk about the benefits of visiting cemeteries as part of travel, which is something I've really learned to enjoy. And Rosie's inspiration to visit the gravestones she's learned about. She said people now notify her when they are aware of a gravestone with a recipe on it. So she has been enjoying traveling to those places to see the gravestone and to prepare the recipe while she's there visiting. We talk also about how food is connected to death and grief, and other interesting cemetery discoveries Rosie has made, and she shares some of her favorite recipes too that she's enjoyed making. And most of them are available on her Instagram account, so you can see the recipes and actually make them yourself. Next, this interview also got me really excited. It was a conversation with Tom Walknitz about the Passages program, an end of life program for a senior living community where he is working. And Tom had the brilliant idea. He is a chaplain and end of life doula, and he got the idea to bring Inelda training to the residents of his senior living community to train them to be death doulas so that they can serve their neighbors and loved ones and friends in the senior community. And I think this is an amazing model, and I would love to see this replicated all around the country. And what a powerful group of people to train to be end of life doulas. Um, he talked about using guided imagery with the residents at his community, telling familial stories. Talked about how he facilitates end of life conversations with residents and their family members, and what he learned in his first year as an end of life doula. And it was a great conversation. And again, I'm sharing it because I found it so exciting to hear what Tom has been able to do at one senior living community. And I guess it's spreading to other communities within that same system. But I hope this inspires people in other communities to take a look and see if something similar might be possible to bring end of life doula training to the residents of the community. Next, I loved this so much, talking with Dina Stander about the phone of the wind, or the wind phone, some people call it, um, to help those who are grieving to connect with their loved ones. So she tells us all about the history behind the phone of the wind and what it is, which is a phone that's not connected to anything, but that's located oftentimes in nature in a beautiful spot. Excuse me, where people can pick up the phone and call a loved one who has died and talk to them on the phone. And so there are a number of phones located throughout the country in various places. She tells us how to find one, what type of phone is best to use. Dina herself has created a mobile phone of the wind that she can take and set up at conferences or in various sites. And how this phone of the wind is really powerful because it allows for expression of all emotions in a private and safe way. And why having a phone of the wind in your community could play a role in establishing a compassionate community. And next, I'm sharing this again because this was one of the most popular conversations I've had with Barbara Carnes. We've done a series of conversations where we've talked about all sorts of topics around end of life and especially hospice care. And in this episode, we talked about nutrition at the end of life, and people found it really helpful and compelling. And Barbara has a new book about it. So we talked about her booklet, which you'll learn about if you take a listen to this. We talked about how food is a top concern for caregivers when a loved one is nearing death, but is not a need in particular for a person who's dying. And in fact, might make them feel worse if they eat foods that their body doesn't really need or want. I talked about how food represents love and is tied to our emotions and socialization. And Barbara talks about the foods we could concentrate on earlier in the dying process that can help build up the energy reserve as we prepare for consumption to decrease gradually as our loved one gets closer and closer to death. And having a flexible plan for nutrition during the last months of life, which can help alleviate some of the stress and discomfort for caregivers who are worrying about their loved one and whether or not they're getting enough nutrition. Next, a conversation with another hospice nurse, Gabrielle Elise Jimenez, on supporting family caregivers. And Gabrielle shares her notes from the field. She talked about major issues for family caregivers tending a loved one on hospice care, and particularly how the lack of training for caregivers leads to fears and lingering guilt for those caregivers because because they're concerned about not doing the right thing or that they haven't done enough to help their loved one. She shared with us what she says to reassure family caregivers and why end of life workers need to slow down and listen to the concerns of the caregiver to make sure they're meeting all their needs and really hearing what they need from us and what they need us to give them. And then she shared some great tools and tips for supporting a family caregiver. So, another fabulous interview. I always love talking with Gabby. And this interview I just recently shared the workshop we did together. But if you missed our prior interview with doctors Xian Xiao and Sammy Winemaker, I encourage you to go back and listen. Transforming the Illness Experience, which is about their book, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest. And they talked all about the 7 keys they focus on for navigating serious illness, why patients and their families benefit from walking the 2 roads of hope and preparation. I really love that metaphor. It's perfect and really beautiful. And you will be inspired if you listen to this conversation, I guarantee you. How the medical system currently fails to support patients in preparing for the possibility that treatment may not have the desired outcome. Too often, the focus is all on the road of hope and not enough on the road of preparing just in case things don't work the way we wish they would. And we also talk about how our hopes and plans both evolve as our illness journey changes, and that using a palliative approach is actually good for clinicians because it helps them avoid burnout as well. So, one of my favorite conversations ever. And I loved the workshop also, which I recently shared. You can go back a couple of weeks and you'll find that workshop. I shared the recording of it on the podcast. And I encourage you to take a listen to that one as well. And then a new series that we're getting started with Benjamin Kintish, who's a cantor, composer, singer songwriter, music teacher, the composer of Life Review, the hospice musical. And Ben and I are doing a little series on death and grief in pop culture. And in this episode, we talk about the Broadway musical Hamilton. One of my favorite things. I love talking about it. We had so much fun talking about this together, sharing the most powerful moments of this musical, what they meant to us, and how we were each moved by certain scenes in this musical, and particularly certain songs. And so we share how we're using grief as a lens through which to view the hit Hamilton, but also a lens to view Alexander Hamilton's life as portrayed in this musical. And we share some of the lyrics from songs that were touched by the stories behind the songs, and how watching a musical like this can really help us experience the full spectrum of emotions in our grief. And so this is how pop culture, it can help us become more death literate and grief literate by just being open to the stories that are being portrayed to us, to the emotions that characters are experiencing. And being able to live through those characters helps us get in touch with emotions that we may have repressed or may have been afraid to experience for ourselves. And so Ben and I have plans for more episodes in 2025, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then another favorite conversation with Dr. Corey Lee, who wrote the book A Teen's Guide to Grief and Grieving. It's the title is actually It Will Never Be the Same Again, I believe. Um, and she is specializes in childhood and teenage grief. And this was a really powerful, beautiful conversation, and one that we perhaps don't talk about often enough, how to meet the grief needs of children and adolescents. And so I wanted you all to know about her books. They are going to be on the reading list for a year of reading dangerously for 2025, because these need to be on all of our shelves, because we are going to be working with families with children and teens who are experiencing grief, and we want to make sure we don't leave them out of the process. And having resources like Corey's books that you can give to a family could make all the difference. So she talks about the gap in resources for children and teens, and how 1 out of every 10 children will experience the death of a parent or sibling before the age of 18. So it is perhaps more common than we know for children and teens to be experiencing grief. We talk about grief in school and why teachers need to be trained to recognize grief in their students and to know how to handle it when a child is actively grieving in school. She shared a resource for becoming a grief informed school, which is really powerful. I loved it. And you need to listen to this interview so you can find out about it. Tips for dealing with grief in the classroom, including the teacher's own grief, which also needs to be recognized. So, this is such an important conversation. I can't emphasize it enough. I hope that you will definitely take a listen to this and get Corey's books and make sure you have them on your shelf. If you're working at all in the end of life, no matter what area you work in, you might be a doula, you might be a hospice worker, you might run a funeral home, you might do advanced care planning, you might do financial planning, estate planning with people. Wherever you work, you're going to encounter people who have children and teenagers who are also dealing with grief. And so you should know about these books because they're such good resources. And then finally, another favorite interview, which I did just recently on help texts, text based grief support with Emma Payne. Love help texts and I want everyone to know about it and start using it. Hospices can sign up for help texts for their patients. And if you missed this interview, please go back and listen to it, because help text, it's such a simple resource to recommend to people that they can sign up for and get text messages that will support them through grief, and also the people who are in their lives that are caring for them and about them as well can get text messages on how to support their grieving loved one. And so, Emma, I've interviewed her before, but we talked about all the changes that have happened, the great changes at Help Texts, and some of the results that they've seen, the efficacy of text messaging, which is working really well. People are very satisfied, and it's making a big difference. We talked about how they customize and personalize the text messages that people receive. Again, the research that they've done showing the efficacy of the message, the fact that the cost of help text is less than 1 hour of therapy, and I think more effective, and a lot more help text is offering Also, text messages for caregivers, for healthcare workers, for pet loss, and for pregnancy loss. So there's so much in this interview. It's really important, and I hope you'll take a listen if you missed it, because again, this is a resource you need to know about. This is something you will want to recommend to people who are grieving and people who want to know, how do I support someone who's grieving? So let them know about help texts. And I do have an affiliate account, so you can go to helptexts.com/EOLU. That's my affiliate page, or I will leave it in the show notes for this episode. And you can get a $10 discount on a 1-year subscription if you sign up for Help Texts. So that's the end of my highlights for 2024. It's been a fantastic year. Thank you all for being here as my listeners and supporters. I really appreciate you and your presence. I also appreciate all the donations that you've made over this year that are helping to keep the podcast and the YouTube channel on the air. And I'll just remind you, you can go either to eoluniversity.com/support or to eolupodcast.com, and you'll find these 3 ways of making a contribution. If you want to chip in a little, you can buy me a coffee whenever you enjoy a particular episode. That sends me a signal like, wow, I loved this one, and buy me a coffee for an episode that you really liked. You can make a one-time donation on PayPal of any amount. You choose the amount, whatever you would like to pay, or you can join the community on my Patreon page at patreon.com/EOLU. And you'll get some bonuses there, like the end of life news update, news that I curate for you once a month of things that are happening in the end of life field, interesting articles, studies that I've read, things that are happening. I also send out a what to watch list each month that recommends some programming, streaming content, movies, series, documentaries, things you might find of interest that deal with death, dying, grief, and the afterlife. Sometimes I post interview extras, and you can also get physical merchandise by becoming a patron on the Patreon page, which is a subscription. For 1 year, you can pay by the month or pay for a whole year at a time if you prefer. So again, eoluniversity.com/support or eolupodcast.com. You'll find links to all those ways to support the podcast. Thank you. Thank you to everyone, as I said before, who's been supporting all year. And if you're interested in just chipping in a little bit, check out these links and see if anything appeals to you. I am wishing you all the best for the coming year. Remember, I'm starting up again next week, the first Monday of January, with a new interview for you. And I'm planning to slow down a little bit and post interviews every other week instead of every week. I've been told by many of you that you can't keep up anyway. I put out too much content. I'm going to slow down, which will help me reduce a little bit of my workload and give you more time to keep up with all the interviews that I'm doing. And so I'll be here next week. And until then, remember, we're here for love. That is the one thing we could all focus on in 2025 that will make the biggest difference. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of your very, very precious existence. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this sharing of highlights from End of Life University and 2024. And I'll see you next year with the next interview.